all about the laws of how one conducts himself with regard to taking showers, bathing on fast days and on Tisha B'Av or Avelos in mourning. And the Gemara has mentioned a few opinions, mentioned Rav Chizda and mentioned Rava. And Rav Chizda differentiated between a communal fast day, something that has to do with tainug, pleasure. We want to limit our pleasure, and something that has to do with avelos, mourning. And so that was Rav Chizda's opinion, that there's a difference between cold water. One of them permitted cold water. In one case, it was permitted in the case of a communal fast day, not Tisha B'Av, but other communal fast days. For example, for rain, if they were fasting for rain, they would the second group of 3 fasts and the third group of 7 fasts. Those fast days would be prohibited to have hot water, but you would be allowed to bathe in cold water. However, when it came to something that has to do with avelos, mourning, for example, Tisha B'Av, or a case of a person sitting shiva, so in those days, those situations would be prohibited even in cold water. Take a full, complete shower, a complete bath. So that was the opinion of Rav Chizda. And then we had Rava initially wanted to argue with that, and then Rava seemed to come around. The bottom of page 13a, it mentioned Rava wanted to permit even for avelos, even during mourning, during Shiva, that you could even take a bath in cold water. His source was, well, you're allowed to have some level of pleasure, and like, for example, you're allowed to drink wine, you're allowed to eat meat, so you should be allowed to take a shower at least in cold water. And basically, according to that, it would actually be the same as the laws of a communal fast day. And the Gemara, on both of these opinions, Rava's opinion and Rav Chizda's opinion, it tried to bring proofs back and forth, questions, and ultimately, the Gemara didn't seem to didn't prove Rava wrong. It did bring a little source for Rav Chizda's law, one of the laws of Rav Chizda, that cold water is permitted cold water would be permitted on a communal fast day. That it did seem to bring a little proof to, but everything else that it tried to debate, it didn't seem to prove anything concrete. And Rava didn't really talk about a communal fast day. So basically, when we talk about the Avelos laws, it didn't seem to prove either way. And then the Gemara brought another version of Rava where he agrees with Rav Chizda. And again, the Gemara brought this other view, and it tried to ask him questions and prove or support him. And ultimately, the Gemara concluded and said that the halacha and that an avel is usher, whether with hot water or with cold water, is prohibited all 7 days. But if he wants to wash his head, face, and hands and feet with cold water, that would be allowed. And then it talked about lasuch, which is anointing oneself. And that it said even a drop is prohibited. You can't put any anointing oneself with oil. In the olden days, that's something that they would do. But it does say that it is permitted to use some type of a deodorant that removes the bad smell or the filth. That would be permitted. And that is in a case of avelos. Yes, Robert.
So I don't understand why. First of all, it's questionable the distinction between using a razor and using scissors to cut one hair. And again, the contradiction of, Orthodox Jewish men having a beard and not using a razor. So how do we reconcile some of these? Is it a historical sequence of interpretations or whatever?
So using a razor on a beard is 100% prohibited. There's no leniencies at all for that. However, with regard to our Gemara, that it says something about using a razor and not a scissors, that's not talking about the beard. That's talking about a person who needs to take a haircut, and they have to sit shiva twice. The haircut they have to do in a way that's a change from the norm. So a normal person takes a haircut. You don't use a razor to cut your hair. That could be even dangerous, maybe. But the thing is that if they need to take a haircut because they had to sit shiva twice, they're sitting shiva twice, and they had two shivas right after each other. So we tell you can't take a regular haircut, but if you do it with a shina, a change, then it would be permissible. And what is the change the Gemara suggests? Use a razor, which you're not really cutting your entire hair. You're cutting off the big globs of hair with that razor. You're going in certain areas, I guess, and cutting it, and so that is permissible.
So within the Shiva experience, these are the rationale for it is that because it's an extraordinary. I mean, we don't sit Shiva all the time. It's also it's a special time in sitting Shiva that we would not want to otherwise have that as an experience.
Of course, it's under such a situation where such terrible tragedy struck this man twice. So he's really stuck, but he needs, so it's not like he's indulging himself in some pleasure. He's simply getting rid of this overly, he's in a state of over suffering, not regular suffering, but more than regular suffering with his hair, and he had no choice and no chance of cutting it. So it's a leniency for him to get rid of some of his extra hair that he shouldn't feel so overly uncomfortable. Okay. Yes, David.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not trying to promote shaving, but just to clarify, there's a difference between using a razor and using a shaver. So those that permit shaving for shaving, they permit shaving with a shaver, but not with a razor.
Yeah, I think that's pretty obvious. We mentioned that a razor is prohibited, but there are rabbis. The rabbis debate on a beard about the different options of what is allowed. And some rabbis permit certain shavers, electric shavers. Others say you should use some type of a cream. I have a friend who used to shave with a cream. It would somehow burn the hairs of his beard. It was
you mean depilatories, right? Whatever that category is.
I don't know what that word means, but he was a Litvak, a real Litvak. And he was extra careful not to use even an electric shaver. So he would somehow put this stuff on his beard and then take some type of a toothpick or I don't know, maybe a popsicle stick, and somehow like wipe off the hair. It somehow burned the hair. So there are, and he was following a very strict view that says that you're not allowed to use, but not the real strict who don't even shave at all. But he was following a extra strict view that didn't allow shavers. There were different opinions about shavers over the years, about electric shavers. It's funny because there was a rabbi in Israel who's a big real Litvish rabbi. So someone told them, listen, I'm going to buy electric shavers and give them out to some of my friends who use razors. I don't want them to sin with a razor. I'd like to give them electric shavers, and I'll be doing like a little project, of promoting Judaism, because I'm going to give these other Jewish people who use razors, I want to give them electric shavers. So he asked his rabbinic rabbi, which shaver should I give them? So this rabbi, who's a big Rosh Hashiva and among the Litvaks, and many of his students even shave. He told this man, he says, I'm sorry, but I hold you're not allowed to shave. I can't, there's no shavers that you can give them. I hold you're not allowed to. That means his students didn't even follow. His students used to shave themselves, but he refused to endorse any shaver because he claimed, I'm not allowed, I don't allow shavers. I don't hold it's allowed, you know. So even though all his students used to shave, but he wouldn't, he didn't allow it. Anyway, so there's different opinions about it. Obviously, there are definitely lenient views that it's okay. And you know, and that's there are many people rely on the lenient views.
There's one particular shaver which is close to a razor. It's a Norelco. So anybody that says you're allowed to shave with a shaver, they forbid Norelco because the Norelco cuts in such a way it's like a razor.
Well, what it boils down to is, well, I mean, I shouldn't say what it boils down to. That's a good point, and I'm not exactly sure what the details of how the shaver and the razor work. But what it's based, what the original discussion has to do with the fact that the Talmud talks about the prohibition of shaving one's beard, and when the Talmud talks about it, it does exclude the scissors from a razor, and it says a razor. This is talking about a razor, but not about scissors. And so the question that the rabbis debate there is, does that mean that a person who uses scissors doesn't get the punishment? Or does that mean he's permitted to use scissors? Again, the Talmud talks about an exclusion. It excludes scissors from the discussion, but it doesn't say clearly if that means that it's permitted with scissors or if it's just you don't get the punishment if you use scissors, because there's a lot of cases in the Torah and the Talmud that talk about situations where you don't get the punishment, but it's prohibited. So that's one discussion about shaving. The other discussion about shaving is that it might have to do with doing something that makes one look like a woman, like almost like wearing a woman's clothing. So these two discussions are debated by the big authorities. And of course, there are lenient views, even though, you know, some rabbis are very strong on their opinion that it's prohibited. There are lenient views. And, but this is where it is debated, and that's the discussion. Okay, yes, Ben.
I wanted to say I can tell you the difference between a scissor and a razor. A razor goes down to the skin. A scissor, you never go down to the skin.
Right. Okay.
And the shavers, there are shavers that go left and right, you know, just back and forth, is one way of cutting the hair. There is some that are round cutters, 3 round cutters or 2 round cutters, and
how
those
do they
are going in circles. So I don't know if that makes a difference or what.
Yeah, I don't know if David did his research.
Yeah, that's the Norelco, the one that goes in the circles that cuts like a razor. So it goes to the skin. It's not going back and forth like a scissors, like a regular shaver is more like a scissors. And the Norelco is going right to the skin.
So is that,
Like
see, I thought that the difference had to do with how it cuts, not if it cuts close. Like if you could get a scissors that cut really close to the skin.
It has to be very thin to go close to the skin.
Right. If you could do that, I don't know. Maybe it would be permissible, but according to what David and Ben are saying, maybe it has to do with simply if it is close to the skin, that basically makes it a razor and prohibited. I'm not sure if that's correct, but maybe. I mean,
Rabbi.
One second, Moshe. I got to get back over here. Yes.
One reason you don't use a razor because a razorback pig.
A razor what?
Or there's a pig called a razorback pig, if I'm not mistaken.
So
you know, maybe it's about with a hazard anyway.
Very cute. Yeah, maybe someone who shaves did their research on this. I don't know. Avram, are you familiar with the different types of shavers? What the rabbinic rules are? Or Ben, have you done your research? Like which ones are which? Or
I thought that in the army some of the guys used something on their face, but I thought it was the glue like that what women use. But maybe you are right. Maybe it's a cream. So I
Interesting.
don't
So
know.
you're
They
saying
didn't use
uh
metal, but they used some kind of
that's so
cream or
that's
whatever.
interesting. So what you're questioning is maybe they think they're being extra strict not to use an electric shaver. Maybe they're actually doing more of a sin because it's similar to women that
I
puts
don't know.
cream on their face. That's an interesting thought. Anyway,
I've heard Rabbi Gordon Olashom tell his class members, because a lot of them shave. If you're going to shave, don't use Norelco because that's more like a razor.
More prohibited. Anyway, well, bottom line is there's obviously lenient views, and we can't tell anyone if they're that they can't. But there are views both ways. It does say in Kabbalistic writings that it's supposed to bring more mercy. If you have the beard, it's connected to the 13 attributes of mercy. So there's a extra benefit if you have the beard. It's supposed to add some level. You draw down some level of mercy from Hashem. Okay. Anyway, bottom line, getting back to here. So we were talking about the laws of Avelos. I did want to mention one thing as well, that what about wearing deodorant on Tisha B'Av and on Yom Kippur? So it turns out that it depends. Tisha B'Av, it's actually permitted, as our Gemara seems to imply, that if you're laha'avir hazuhama, you're allowed to anoint yourself with something that's going to remove the dirt or the bad smell, and that would be deodorant. Again, perfume is a problem because perfume would be similar to like sicha, to anointing oneself. But deodorant, that's to remove a bad smell, that would be permissible on Tisha B'Av. Interestingly enough, it's not permissible on Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur deodorant is prohibited. Our Gemara is really talking about Avelos, and would basically apply to the law of it talks about Avelos, but it would apply to the law would apply to this law would apply to Tisha B'Av as well, that it would be permitted to use deodorant, at least according to most opinions. And but Yom Kippur actually, even though pretty much they have the same laws, we don't wear leather shoes, we're fasting, and we don't wash ourselves, but deodorant actually is a difference between Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippur. Okay, so that's a halacha, the difference. Now, so let's just go over a few of the detailed. We spoke about a few brises here that the Gemara tried to prove or go back and forth, and I just want to go over them because they were mentioned twice in our Gemara, these brises. The brises that we mentioned, one of them, let's see, one of them had to do with one of them had to do with going to mikvah on Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippur when a person has a mitzvah to go to mikvah. So a woman, she just gave birth. So after 7 days or after 14 days, in the olden days, they would go to mikvah after 7 or 14 days. Nowadays, women bleed for much longer than that. But in theory, if they stopped bleeding, they would go to mikvah after 7 days or after 14 days, depending on a boy or a girl. So that mikvah would be a mitzvah to go to mikvah then, and they would if that mikvah fell out on Tisha B'Av or on Yom Kippur, so the law is that they would be allowed to go to mikvah. Now, the Gemara then says, is that with hot water or cold water? And the Gemara says, well, hot water would be shu'uvim, would be water that is drawn. So the Gemara says it must be talking about cold water, and that means that only if it's a mitzvah to go to mikvah, you could go to mikvah that night. But the regular person who doesn't have a mitzvah to go to mikvah, they want to take a shower, they would not be allowed to take a shower even in cold water, because we're obviously talking about cold water. So the Gemara, so it seemed to prove that cold water is prohibited on Tisha B'Av, which basically would mean that it would be prohibited on days of Avelos, on fast days that have to do with morning. Any fast that has to do with morning, just like Tisha B'Av, would be in the same category that is prohibited even in cold water. That was the Gemara's proof. The Gemara then answered that, it gave an answer. I want to stop there just for a moment. What did the Gemara say here? It said it can't be talking about hot water because you can't have a hot water mikvah. The thing is, all of our mikvahs nowadays are hot water. In fact, the only, very rare do you find people there. Chabad shluchim. I was in Idaho, and I was told that they mentioned to me that behind the house they have a stream of water. They sometimes use it as a mikvah. So I had just gone to Idaho. I said, "Oh, let me. I haven't gone to mikvah in a few days. Let me jump in." I could not get myself in this stream. It was so cold. It was freezing. And I've gone to the Ariz mikvah many times, but this was freezing. And I don't know how these women do it. They go to the mikvah in the cold. But in general, most mikvahs, or almost all mikvahs, are nice and hot. And so our Gemara is talking practically, I guess, in the olden days, it was very hard to have a hot mikvah. Nowadays, they have heaters that are in the mikvah heating up the water. And additionally, we have, you can pour into the mikvah hot water and it attaches to the original water that's below. So there's a whole, there are ways of heating up the water as well that, that aren't problematic. But in the olden days, it seems that it was very hard for them to have a hot mikvah, because if they would heat up the water in a pot and then pour it into this into a pool, into an empty pool, and pour the hot water in and continue pouring more and more into the a pool and make a hot mikvah, the water wouldn't be kosher anymore because it was in a pot. Any pot would be a vessel. Water that's in a vessel, it's called she'uvim. It's drawn water. Drawn water is not allowed. It has to be rainwater. That's why when the mikvahs, how do they have a mikvah nowadays? The mikvah is made, rainwater falls onto the top of a building, and there's a hole that it drips down, it pours down into a lower division than the mikvah. So if you ever go to a mikvah, you will see there's a hole in the wall of the mikvah or in the floor of the mikvah. One type of mikvah there's an extra pool of water next door to the mikvah or under the mikvah, and there's a hole that attaches the two. What's the difference between these two pools of water? The water that you don't see, you just see a hole, that water is the rainwater. That's called the bar, the pit. That's where the rainwater falls into. It either falls into a pit below the mikvah, which is called a bar al gabe bar. It's a one mikvah on top of another. And the other is a bar min hatzad. There's a pit that's on the side of the mikvah. Either way, you're not really dunking in rainwater. You're dunking in faucet water. And what they do is the faucet water is attached to the rainwater. So the mikvah water, that's rainwater, is never was in any vessel. It falls from the sky, falls into the other pit, the other bar, we'll call it, this pool. It falls into it, and
then the two waters kiss.
That's right. Now the water falls into it without using any vessel to put it in. It rains into it. In fact, they have to be very careful what type of a pipe does it go through in order to reach. In other words, it falls onto the building, and it has
There
to
should
be
be no pools,
no bends in that.
no pools of water.
Right. It never stops. It's not a vessel, so it ends up falling basically directly into the pit that's beside or under the mikvah. And then you have the mikvah that we dunk in, and that mikvah is the way it's filled is with a faucet. But then, as Isaac just said, the waters, there's a hole in between the attaching the two, and when the mikvahs kiss, it's called hashaka. They kiss, and that makes the water that you're dunking in into a kosher mikvah. And so that's why there's a hole near the mikvah, not a hole that you could fall in, but it's a hole that's you'll see in any mikvah. There's actually a hole there. Now, the commentaries on this Gemara, they do ask that there is another way of making a kosher mikvah without rainwater, and that is called hamshacha. You could pour the water along the ground, and if it goes out of a vessel, but it pours along the ground and it travels, it actually is considered kosher water. And the Gemara is basically here saying that you can't have a hot mikvah. You could have a hot mikvah if you just pour the water not directly into the pool, but you let it pour along, let it travel along the floor, and it'll then fall into the mikvah. So you've now permitted this water, even though you drew it with a big pot and you heated it up. You could then do hamshacha, which is letting the water, dragging the water, so to speak. It's being dragged along the floor, and it could make an actually hot mikvah. And the Teves asked this question together with many of the other commentaries, and they say, why can't you have a hot mikvah with and it's not shu'uvim, it's not drawn water, because you did what's called hamshacha. So Teves' answer is that you see from here that hamshacha doesn't work if you do the whole mikvah this way. It will only work if you have less than half of the mikvah this way, only a portion of it. And in this that it says, even if it's hamshacha is completely is kosher, all that means is that it doesn't ruin a mikvah, but you can't just go into a mikvah that's done with this hamshacha. So in other words, there's a discussion about to what extent does the permit of hamshacha work. Can you draw water and make a mikvah out of the water that was drawn and then pour it along the floor and make it kosher? Or does the majority have to be rainwater? That only works if you have a minority of that. Anyway, these are some of the discussions that are talked about here, where our Gemara implies you can't have a hot mikvah, and really there are ways of making a hot mikvah. Maybe it wasn't so practical in the olden days, but there are ways of doing a hot mikvah. And of course, nowadays that's the common mikvah is a hot mikvah. And the only famous mikvah that's not hot is the Ariz mikvah in Tzfas, if any of you have ever been there. But otherwise, it's almost unheard of to have a. There are also where there are places where they have 3 mikvahs. You go to these fancy mikvahs for men. So there are places where they'll have 3 mikvahs. One is boiling hot, one is just regular hot, and one is cold. So everyone they try to make everyone happy. So they have three options. But it's very rare to have cold mikvahs. And most mikvahs nowadays are hot. Okay, so the Gemara brought this.
It's not really boiling hot. It's just very hot.
Yeah, okay. I shouldn't say boiling. I guess that would be dangerous. But they do have 2 hots. One regular hot and one extra hot. So with that extra hot, I use the term boiling, but you're right. It can't be actually boiling. That wouldn't be safe. Yes, Mordechai.
Yes. When it comes to mikvahs, and like also sometimes, I mean, say like out of town, sometimes they'll have the men's mikveh and the women's mikveh are at opposite ends of the same building with separate entrances. Because
Not only that, and you're saying they're using the same
right,
body of rainwater for
right,
both. Right, right. There are yeah.
right. Like for like my Mechuta Mayor Harlig in Henderson, Nevada. Not Mayor Harlig.
Son, yeah.
Mendy Harlig.
Uh-huh.
My Mendy Harlig in Henderson, Nevada. They recently built a mikveh, and it's the men's and the women's are using the same bore, and of course, being that it was out in the desert, it took them a long time to have gotten the
Get
original source.
to get rainwater.
Right.
So how did they do it?
I guess they just waited for it.
Uh-huh. Because I remember the Shulabel Harbor, even the places where it rains, they once decided, let's empty out our bar, which isn't so common. And they ended up getting stuck for months without, with it didn't until it filled up. It was like it was unheard of. They like didn't believe that it would, they obviously didn't think that would happen, but they emptied it out. Basically, there's an issue with mikvahs. The rainwater, we're always worried that the rainwater, after so many years, the water mixes, and so you don't have majority rainwater anymore. And what ends up happening is you don't have the really it should have 40 saw of rainwater. So if it mixes, and when they empty the bathing pool, some of the rainwater ends up being mixed, and some of the bathing pool water gets mixed in the other pit. So there's always an issue. So in the Shulabel Harbor, they decided maybe we should empty it and clean it out, because it definitely mixes a little. So they did, but then they ended up getting stuck for a while till it filled up. But that is one of the mikveh issues that
can we use snow?
So yes, snow could be used for a mikveh, but not it has to be
Melted.
No, well, yeah, I'm not sure if it needs to melt.
Because today we have the first snow and it's snowing like crazy.
So a lot of people use snow in order to make a mikvah. I mean, not a lot of people. It is used sometimes to make a mikvah, because if the places don't have rainwater, so they're able to bring snow in order for it not to be
use it as water.
They use it, but of course they don't dunk in the snow. But it doesn't become prohibited when it's until it's with the problem of bringing rainwater. You don't have that problem with snow. So they as long as it stays snow and it doesn't melt. So they bring snow from the mountains, and they quickly bring it into the mikvah.
Yeah.
And I guess it's used. Obviously, it has to be done with a great rabbinic supervision, but it's sometimes used because of the places where they don't. So I was wondering if Mordechai's story had to do if they brought snow in order to make it work. Theoretically,
no, but my Mechutun also told me about that around the time that they were hoping to open the mikveh, that they had that there was like a huge rainfall that allowed it.
Oh wow,
Right.
That's a miracle.
Right.
Yeah, very nice. Okay, so anyway, well, let's continue. So the Gemara then talked about that was an issue that the Gemara that the commentaries dealt with, about having a hot mikveh and how do you heat it up. And of course, we know an easier way of heating up a mikveh is putting like some type of heater in it and heating it up, and of course that doesn't ruin the mikveh. So the Gemara said that it could be talking about that case where they allowed to go to a mikveh, and only if they have a mitzvah to go to mikveh. It could be that case, and it was on Tisha B'Av, and you see that any regular person is not allowed to go to not allowed to take a cold bath only someone who has a mitzvah to go to bathe, they could go to a mikvah. But otherwise, you're not allowed to take a cold bath. The Gemara says that not necessarily is that so. It could be talking about a hot. It could be talking about the Chami Tveria, like the hot springs of Tveria, and maybe that's the type of mikvah that they were going to. When it's really talking about hot, and regular people aren't allowed to go to a hot spring, but maybe cold, everyone is allowed to go. Then the Gemara said, but we can't really say that that's the case, that you would be allowed to go to a cold mikvah, or a cold bathing, excuse me, because why did Rabbi Chanina argue with the first opinion? In Rabbi Chanina, Sgana Kainim, he argued and said, don't go to mikvah, just push it off a day. If everyone's allowed to use cold, so let the person who has to use the mikvah use a cold mikvah. In other words, if he's only arguing on the if everyone agrees that you can use cold and you're only not allowed to use hot, and for a person who has a mitzvah to go to mikvah, the first opinion permitted a hot mikvah. So Rabbi Chanina argued on that. He wanted to say, just push it off. Let him just say, use cold. So the Gemara answered that it must be talking about a case where there is no cold. So, or it could be talking about such a case. So again, with the Gemara proved, the Gemara, I should say, pushed off this proof. The Gemara was able to explain that the proof is not 100% proof. So again, we wanted to prove that on a fast like Tisha B'Av, or someone who's in Velus, they would not be allowed to use even cold water. Umar says it's not really a proof. Umar initially wanted to bring a proof. Umar says it's not a proof. We could answer that talking about certain types of cases. Okay. Then the Gemara said that there was a whole discussion in a brisa about the public fast day, and this is where it mentioned about when they said you're not allowed to do work. It's only talking about by day, by night is permitted. Wearing shoes, only talking about in the city, but on the way it's if you're traveling, it's permitted. And then it says when it says you're not allowed to take a shower, it's talking about it's only talking about the whole body shower, but not just if it's your face, your hands, and your feet. So and then the Gemara said that applies to avelos. Now, what we see from there is that mourning is the same law as a public fast day, which actually from there already you see that there's going to be a problem here. Because if we're comparing the regular Rav Chizda's whole statement, the whole point of Rav Chizda was that there's a differentiation between avelos, like Tisha B'Av, and a public fast day, a regular public fast day that doesn't have to do with mourning. And here we have a brisa that basically is saying that that they're the same. So the Gemara has to explain that it must be that we're not comparing avelos to everything. We're not comparing Tisha B'Av or avelos, a mourning, to all the cases there. And that's what the Gemara basically answers this this question, because otherwise it would have been a question, because we must be talking about cold water, and what comes out is that it would be even prohibited to bathe even in cold water. And the Gemara answered that no, we're talking about hot water, and basically it's we're not comparing the laws of mourning to the laws of a fast day. And then the Gemara brought this other case, and that was the case where you had a person who unfortunately had two shivas, one next to each other, and that case we said that he would be allowed to take a shower in cold water. And initially the Gemara understood that to be a regular case of shiva, not two shivas. And the Gemara said, oh, you see, you're even mourning, you could take a shower in cold water. The Gemara's answer was, no, we're talking about two shivas. It was a double mourning, one after the other, and it was a special leniency. And that was the case where Robert mentioned about the razor, where it permitted a person to take a haircut even, which was a little surprising. Normally, people don't take haircuts for for during Shiva for sure. And here permitted him because, but it was not a regular haircut. He could just cut off with the razor as a way. And it also mentioned that he's allowed to launder with um, with with water, but not with these other type of detergents. And one of them was called Neser. Neser, Rashi says it means earth, or it could mean some type of a karya. Karya blaz in Old French, karya, which they translate as gear. I was wondering, Ben, maybe you know what that is. What is, I saw they translated to be, it was a Laz dictionary here that I saw, translated it to mean, let me see, where did I see that?
Rabbi.
One second. Right here. Dalit. Gear. I have to look up in a dictionary. Do you know what gear is, Ben?
Gear,
Yeah, some type of a like a detergent or something. That they used to use it as a detergent. Some type of stone called the gear stone. I have to look
no,
up
I
in it.
don't know what it is. Gear, maybe it's what you write with on a blackboard. That's a gear.
Oh, chalk. Oh, maybe that's it. Okay,
Chalk.
maybe it's chalk. That's called gear.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I guess they used to use that as detergent. Okay, thank you. I figured you would know. Okay.
Rabbi.
Yes, David. Yeah, you want to say
Yeah,
something?
Rabbi Steinsaltz, it says Neser it says it's probably natron, Natron, which is a naturally occurring mixture of sodium carbonate that's found in desert plains. In
Okay.
antiquity, it was produced from algae. It's easily soluble in water and has a strong basic reaction that releases sodium carbonate, a substance that breaks up fats, and therefore it was used as a detergent even in biblical times. And there's a
So
picture of it. It looks like you see like a field of soil, and then in front of that is all this white. It almost looks like white sand or white chalk, almost you would say like chalk.
Yeah, I wonder if chalk is made from that. So
Yeah.
I'm pulling up chalk over here. It says it's limestone composed of the mineral calcite, calcium sulfate. Is that what, does it say those words over there?
No,
Or
it
gypsum?
says that this is sodium carbonate.
Sodium carbonate. No. Okay.
Look
We need a
under
chemist. We
look
need a
under
chemist.
Do they have a picture? Do they have a picture next to it of folded towels?
no.
Okay.
If you look up, can you look up
Anyway, okay.
natron?
Yeah.
Natron.
Go ahead. I'm sure we'll find it. Yeah. Anyway, but very good. Okay, so these are different detergents that they used to use. So he wouldn't be allowed to wash his clothes with that, but with water he was allowed to. So again, he had to do things in a different way, which means that a regular person who's mourning wouldn't be allowed to. Regular availers, they wouldn't be allowed to wash their clothes even with water. And but this person who had a double shiva because he had two tragedies, one after the other, so he was allowed to wash his clothes, but only with water, not with this other stuff, not with this
But
natural.
just for I remember growing up, there was a brand of detergent called borax, which was a naturally occurring element, which is sodium chloride, for people to use as a detergent. I don't know if others remember that, but
Yeah.
again, it was naturally occurring. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Is that what David was talking about? Sodium chloride? Was that the term? Was that the natron? That's it.
Right. And then they marketed it as borax. I don't know if anybody remembers that, but it was somebody on a team of horses with a wagon, and that was what it was called, BORAX.
Okay, so
20 mule team borax.
You got it. That's right, Yehuda.
Okay, so the Gemara then said that Rava, then the Gemara brought Rava's opinion. And Rava said that an Aval is allowed to bathe during the Shiva, and he compared it to eating meat and drinking wine. And then the Gemara brought a brisa. This is a new brisa, and it says a boyeres, which is a woman, a girl who's 12 and a half, who's supposed to be looking for a shidduch. We tell her that she shouldn't make herself look unpresentable. And the Gemara understands it to mean that she is supposed to take a shower or bathe during Shiva. The case is interesting. Rashi gives, what is the case? What is she herself sitting Shiva? So here the case is, and I didn't mention this, or maybe I did actually, I touched on it. What the case is, Rashi gives two examples. One is that her father passed away. It says, Bimei Evel Aviha, on mourning, her father's mourning. So one shot is that her father passed away, and she is supposed to sit Shiva. But because she's also looking for a shidduch, we want to make sure that she finds a shidduch, we tell her she's allowed to do some type of a beautifying herself or minimizing or her unpresentable look. And the understanding of the Gemara initially is that she's supposed to take a shower or a bath. Now, the other way of understanding it is not that her father passed away, that her father is sitting Shiva. And in the time of the Gemara, when a person sat Shiva, their relatives also had sat Shiva. And so her father was sitting Shiva. She was also supposed to sit Shiva with her father. Because when a relative sits Shiva, they would also, some level of respect that the relatives would also sit Shiva. So she was sitting Shiva with her father. And basically, when she's in front of her father, she had the obligation of she would also act in that way, that she would sit Shiva while she's in front of him. So basically, the law was that she was allowed to take a shower, or that's what the Gemara understands. And what it sounds like is a cold shower, because the Gemara says it can't be a hot shower, because a regular person's not allowed to even put hot water on their finger. We're for sure not permitting her to take a cold shower, take a hot shower, because I mean that would be too extreme, and she could clean herself even with cold water. So if you just don't want her to look unpresentable, a cold shower should be enough. You don't have to permit. We're not going to permit a hot shower. So the Gemara understands it to mean a shower, and she's allowed to take a cold shower. The Gemara says that would seem to fit with Rava's opinion, which actually would make it sound like a one second. So it says that a ovel would so it must be talking about a cold. Oh, I'm sorry. It actually doesn't. I'm sorry. It's actually a question on Rava. I made a mistake. It's actually a question on Rava. Why? Because only she is allowed to take because she's looking for a shidduch. She's allowed to take this cold shower, but that implies that everyone else is prohibited to take a cold shower. That's the Gemara. Okay, that's the question. And the Gemara's answer is that we're not even talking about a cold shower here or a hot shower. We're talking about painting the eyelids or some type of mascara or pirkos, which I translated as braiding the hair. And David says that the Sheinzel seems to say it also could mean dyeing one's hair. But anyway, basically, the kichol and pirkos is what the Gemara refers to as that's permitted for a girl who's supposed to be looking for a shidduch during Shiva. She would be allowed to braid her hair and use mascara, and only her, other people would not be allowed to. Now the Gemara then says, now the Gemara brought the story again where this person had to sit Shiva and he took a cold shower, and the Gemara answered that it's talking about a case. He had to sit Shiva twice, so it brings that same brisa twice. Okay, then the Gemara brings Rava's opinion, the different version of it, where he actually says the same thing as Rav Chisda, that an Ovel can't even take a cold shower. So now we have everyone agreeing, and then the Gemara says, why is that different than meat and wine? That an Ovel is allowed to have meat and drink wine. Why would they, if they're allowed to have meat, drink wine, it means they're allowed to have some level of pleasure. So why can't they take cold showers? My answer is, well, eating meat and drinking wine has to do with pakuche pachte. It removes one's pachad, their fear, their anxiety. So wine and meat is permitted, but the pleasure of taking a cold shower even is prohibited. So and then the Gemara wants to bring proofs. Again, it brings the same brises that we brought before. It repeats them to bring proofs to this statement, this opinion of Rava. So it says, what would we brought this brisa earlier. It said the Begeres, this girl who's 12 and a half, she is supposed to take seemingly a cold shower. The Gemara understands it to mean, but everyone else wouldn't be allowed to. She is supposed to be looking for a shidduch. She takes a cold shower, but sounds like everyone else is prohibited in a cold shower, and that would seem to be a support for this new version of Rava's statement, and basically support also Rav Chisda's statement that the regular people are not allowed to take cold showers even during Shiva, even though it's cold, they're not allowed to take it during Shiva. The Gemara answered that we're not talking about that. We're talking about the braiding of the hair, or the mascara, or maybe dyeing one's hair, and this would be what we're dealing with. And she's allowed to braid her hair, to use mascara. A regular person isn't. We're not talking about bathing, so it's not a support. It's not a proof to Rava.
Rabbi?
Rav Chisda. And then the Gemara deals
Rabbi,
with taking with laundering. Yes, Ben.
you mentioned somebody 12 and a half years old.
Yeah.
But the bat mitzvah is at 12.
Yeah. But shidduchim, the Gemara understands, start at 12 and a half.
Okay. So
what she gains in that half a year, I'm not sure. But it's interesting that a girl has she goes through 3 stages, while a boy goes through 2 stages. In other words, a boy starts off as a katan, and then he becomes a bar mitzvah. But a girl actually goes through a katana. She's a child. Then she reaches at 12, and she has her sort of like maturity. She's considered a naira, and that's where there's a lot of laws about a naira ma'urasa. The laws Nara, and she's 12 to 12 and a half. And when she reaches 12 and a half, she's called a boigeres.
okay.
Like reaches a new level of maturity. So it's interesting that a girl has these 3 different stages, and there's many different halachas that have to do with the girl that is a boigeres that doesn't apply when she's a naira. But the Gemara here seems to tell us that a boigeres is supposed to be looking for a shidduch. Isaac, did you want to say something? I heard some noise.
No, sorry, just coughing.
Okay. So the Gemara says that so it's not a proof from that brisa, because it could be talking about tichol in Pirkos. It could be talking about that it's talking about braiding. And so a boigeres is allowed to braid her hair. She's looking for a shidduch, braid her hair, and mascara, and a regular person is not allowed to do that during Shiva. Now, the Gemara, Rav Chisda says, Zoisei meres. I see from here that an ovel cannot launder the clothing. Now, the commentaries discuss this. Where do you see that? Where do you see that you're not allowed to launder clothing? You see that from here? We just said that a boigeres is allowed to, this boigeres, she's 12 and a half, she's allowed to braid her hair. She can use mascara. That tells us that she could launder clothing. So the truth is that some want to say that it's really not from here. Rashi learns that it's from here, but some want to say that it's really, you see this really from the earlier Gemara. The earlier Gemara said that when this rabbi had 2 shivas, 2 tragedies, he had to sit shiva twice, we permitted him to wash his clothing with water. What does that sound like? A regular person that only has 1 shiva, he can't even use water to wash his clothing. So you see from there that you can't wash your clothing. Not from this story. You see it from back there. So some want to say that's really the source of Rav Chisda. But Rashi seems to learn it's from here, because if it's going back there, should have said Rav Chisda's statement earlier in the Gemara. So Rav Chisda wants, so the way you understand Rashi is that the law of washing clothing must be similar to mascara, and if, in other words, if you would be allowed to braid your hair, use mascara, then you would be allowed to take wash your clothing. But if you can't do that, you also can't do tachboises, which is that's the way your Rashi seems to understand it, that it goes hand in hand. Yes.
It seems to me like it's an unfair rule, because people that have two pair of pants and two shirts don't have
Yeah.
a problem.
No. Obviously, you're allowed to, if you don't have any clothes, it's another story. But you're not allowed to wear freshly laundered. So you have to sort of like dirty, you have
Even though they're in storage?
you're supposed to use clothes that's not fresh. If you don't have anything else, is another story. But if you have,
Oh.
Anyway, so that's the Gemara. That's Rav Chizda. Okay, I'm just trying to add in what we missed out on Friday, a few little details, and then the Gemara concludes and says Hilchasa, the final halacha is that an ovel is prohibited to take a shower or bath, whether with hot water or with cold water, all 7 days. But they are allowed to wash their face, their hands, and their feet with cold water. With hot water is prohibited, but with cold water, right? We said even the finger they're not allowed to put into hot water, but their face, their hands, their feet. So for avelos, a person would be allowed to wash their hands, their face, and their face, their hands, and their feet. Now with cold water. Now sicha, anointing is prohibited, but even a drop. And we said that deodorant on a would be permitted, like on Tisha B'Av it's permitted, and so on. But it's brought in Shulchan Aruch for sure if a person has like a health issue, like that they need to, if there are a lot of, if they need to put some cream on or something, medicine, they would be allowed to. Okay, so that was the end of this Gemara, and then the Gemara which we started was the davening of a Taanis. How is it mentioned? How do you add the Anenu prayer? So we know that there's a difference between the Chazan's Shemona Esrei and the individual person davening. And the Chazan, when he repeats the Shemona Esrei, he adds the Anenu between Goyel, Yisrael, and Rifa'enu. He adds a special paragraph and he ends off the Anenu prayer, which is the fast day prayer. He ends it off with a bracha. So he adds a bracha to the Shemona Esrei. And when we do the Anenu prayer on a fast day, we do it only at mincha time, which we've discussed why it seems like maybe you should do it at Shacharis as well, maybe even at Ma'ariv the night before. There's reason to say Anenu different as well earlier, but we don't. Our minhag is not to. We only say it at mincha time, and we mentioned it had to do with the opinion that what happens if you don't end up finishing the fast and whatever. So we push off the Anenu prayer till mincha. Once you mincha, we assume you probably finished the fast without breaking it. But in the morning, we're nervous. It'll be like a lie. You're saying Anenu, and maybe someone might end up breaking the fast. The Chazan could say Anenu, because even if he breaks the fast later, number one, he's fasting now, and number two, at least someone in the community that he's having in mind during his repetition, at least they're fasting. So even if he ends up breaking it, his repetition of the Shemona Esrei, he's including Anenu, and it's not a problem. But for everyone else, we do it in mincha time. Now, when we do it in mincha time, but when do we say the Anenu? We say it in the bracha of Shema Tefillah. So here, this is the source. Our Gemara is basically the source on 13b. This is the source of the different situations of is it done in a bracha of its own? Does it take on a new bracha, and we add a bracha to the Shemona Esrei, or is it just part of the prayer called Shema Tefillah prayer, and it doesn't have a blessing of its own? So that's really the discussion here. We're going to, Mitzvah Hashem, start this tomorrow on 13b. We'll start this new Gemara. Take care. Zai Gesund. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi. Good day, everybody.